What's up, everybody? You're listening to Obsidian Radio, the voice of the everyday brother. I am your host, Mumia Obsidian Ali. It is Saturday, February 11th, 2017. Welcome to the program. Glad you can make it, and thank you for listening. I appreciate it. You know, last week, I had the chance to sit in on one of Black Gnostic Speaks' famous 8-hour marathon hangouts. And had a really nice time chopping it up all night. It was February 3rd, last Friday, and had a really nice time chopping it up with his audience. And we had a really great discussion, very lively discussion about my politics and my particular philosophy and views going forward with regard to Black America and what we, meaning Black men, should do in terms of addressing the varied and sundry problems in and around Black America. Very, very spirited discussion, as I said, and to be sure, and not to be outdone and no surprise, quite a few of his listeners were a bit shaken and upset by what I had to say. And the comments certainly reflect that fact. So the very first link in the comments section below, and definitely you want to pay very close attention to the link section in the comments below, because it's going to be chock full with a lot of links today as I respond to the one and only fellow Black YouTuber and I guess you could say founding member of this Halcyon Commission, Negro Manosphere, Black Manosphere, etc. One of the Negrosphere triumvirate of Angryman himself, O'Shea Duke Jackson, and the Minister Jap. So, Angryman said the following in the comments, which I thought was very interesting, and that forms the basis of today's lead-off podcast segment. He wrote this 4 days ago, so that would have been circa February 7th, thereabout. He wrote this following. What Obsidian doesn't understand, which is part of the reason I don't associate with him anymore, is that racism, in all caps, comes in two forms: voluntary racism and involuntary racism. Voluntary is the Ku Klux Klan, rednecks, etc. Involuntary racism is the institution of racism. The latter is the racism that you don't see every day. Institutional racism has been going on so long that it operates independently of any one group. It's covert. This is by design, especially after the Civil Rights Movement. White supremacy recognized that blatant racism is no longer effective. So because they made this adjustment, some Black people foolishly believe that racism has subsided. However, they completely overlook the institutionalized aspect of racism which built this country. This is the part that Obsidian chooses to ignore. So again, I want you to head on over to Black Gnostic Speaks' channel. It's a very long hangout. It's 8 hours. I'm peppered throughout the hangout, so perhaps the biggest action is in the first few hours of the hangout, in hour 1, hour 2 or so. So check that out. Also, this is Angryman's comment. It's going to appear in the link section below, and I want to thank Angryman for making this comment directly addressing yours truly, because to be frank, the last few times that he addressed me in bitch-made form, I really couldn't respond to him the way I'd like, because, you know, where I come from, men address each other directly by name, and then we cite exactly what the beef we have between us, and then we sit down and see if we can try to work it out, and if we can't do it that way, then we have to step outside. You know, we don't sneak diss each other. We don't do bitch made, stuff. We don't talk like women do, about, sending rumors. I ain't gonna say no names and all that. No, we handle this like men. So I want to commend Angryman for turning over a new leaf in 2017 as opposed to what he did in late 2016 by actually addressing me directly. So that's number one. So since he directly addressed me, and I take it he's listened to at least some of the hangout that I appeared on last week, we can now address the key beef between he and I. As you heard in the podcast, his position is that the number one problem facing black people is racism. Involuntary racism, institutional racism, structural racism, white supremacy. That's the number one problem facing black people in the 21st century, about to go into the third decade of the 21st century. Okay, fair enough. That's his position. All right. My position is that the number one problem facing black people in the United States, about to go into the third decade of the 21st century, is not racism, voluntary or involuntary, is not institutional or structural racism, is not white supremacy. It's other black people. A century ago, W.E.B. Du Bois, famous and celebrated scholar, writer, etc., civil rights activist, famously said that the problem of the Negro in the 20th century was the color line. And in many ways, he was right. He was correct. However, as I've just got finished saying, the problem for the black American in the 21st century is the mirror. That's the problem. Now, that's not a very popular stance to take. I mean, right here on Black YouTube, we can clearly see that. I'm going to lay out to you why nobody else in Black YouTube does what the old man does in this regard. And while I go through all the evidence in support of my position, just ask yourself, why haven't other black YouTubers, Tommy Sotomayor included, not gone to the lengths and detail that yours truly has in making this case? So, as Carl Sagan, and yeah, I know he was a dead white guy, but it's true nonetheless, as he most famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Of course, Angryman is strong on rhetoric and short on empirical evidence. If you're going to claim that institutional and structural racism is the single biggest problems affecting black people, you have to, present a lot of smoking gun evidence to support that. He doesn't. But I am going to support a lot of smoking gun evidence in support of my argument that in the 21st century, the single biggest problem facing black Americans is themselves. So let's begin with our first link in this regard. All links are going to be in the comments section below. Once again, this is a PDF paper called Race, Accountability, and Corruption, a survey experiment written by Joseph Wantz, Department of Political Science at the University of Utah, and Derek McNally, Department of Government and Politics, University of Maryland, College Park. This was presented at a Western Political Science Association annual meeting on April 4th, 2015. Now that's an interesting date because April 4th, of course, is the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee by James Earl Ray. Abstract. This paper presents an original survey experiment examining the effects of race on perceptions of mayoral corruption. We find no effect of race on the likelihood of white or Latino respondents supporting a corrupt politician, while black respondents are more likely to support a black politician who is corrupt, all else being equal. We also find that education has a negative effect on the likelihood of black respondents supporting a corrupt black politician. This paper adds to the literature on linked fate by highlighting the contextual nature of the effects of linked fate. This paper also bridges the gap between research on electoral accountability and research on the effects of linked fate. In January 1990, 3 years into his third year as the mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry was arrested by the FBI and D.C. police for possession of crack cocaine. He was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison. Despite his legal issues, however, he won his fourth term as mayor in 1994 and served on the D.C. City Council from 2002 to 2014, weathering a myriad of other scandals along the way. Barry, quite clearly, was beloved in D.C. and had become nearly bulletproof when it came to winning elections. His obituary in the Washington Post succinctly described his impact on politics in the district. Quote, "The most influential and savvy local politician of his generation, Mr. Barry dominated the city's political landscape in the final quarter of the 20th century. There was a time when his critics, in sarcasm but not entirely in jest, called him mayor for life. He came to Washington as a champion of the downtrodden and the dispossessed and rose to the pinnacle of power and prestige. As mayor of the district, Mr. Barry became a national symbol of self-governance for urban blacks." On the other hand, Kwame Kilpatrick, Detroit's mayor from 2002 to 2008, had just as tumultuous, though not as successful, a political career as Barry. Kilpatrick's first term as mayor was racked by controversy and scandal, and he lost the 2005 Democratic primary before narrowly winning a second term in the general election. Kilpatrick's political corruption charges were arguably worse than Barry's, and he was sentenced to 28 years in prison as a result. He was, however, still able to win a second term, if not exactly the hearts and minds of the electorate. Very few kind words were written about Kilpatrick's demise as scandal after scandal continued to rock the already embattled Detroit community. Keep in mind, by the way, that both DC and Detroit were controlled by Black Democrat Party rule for the better part of a half a century. In Detroit, we have to mention Coleman Young, another de facto mayor for life, who was also racked by scandal after scandal after scandal, and yet he continued to get elected again and again and again by an almost entirely black electorate. Detroit, Motown, that smoldering crater that we know today in urban black America, is the blackest city of all cities in the United States. I think last time I checked, it was upwards of 80% city population being black. So that's our first link. Now let's go to the next link, and I'm focusing here on politics, black political leadership in black cities across black America. And I'm doing this to test the idea of institutional racism, of involuntary racism, somehow holding black Americans back. This is what Angryman alleges. Let's see how it holds up to the evidence. Of course, perhaps he can, explain to us how involuntary racism somehow made Marion Barry obtain crack cocaine and smoke it on camera with a prostitute. Perhaps he can explain how involuntary racism made Coleman Young so corrupt over 4 decades. Or maybe he had a 20-year career. I take that back. He had a 20-year career in politics in Detroit. So just want to state that for the record. And perhaps he can just explain how Kwame Kilpatrick, son of a prominent black female politician in Detroit, I might add, maybe he can explain how, the invisible hand of white supremacy made him so irrevocably corrupt. We patiently wait for the Angryman to address those questions. Meanwhile, we go to the independent black media website New Possibilities, a bold new black voice speaking truth to power without fear, and the post written by, Asan Asaka, who is the founder of this website, written on Saturday, November 10th, 2010, 7 years ago. Headline: Are black politicians more corrupt than white politicians? African Americans marched, fought, bled, and died for the right to vote. The struggle for the right to vote was an integral part of the larger civil rights struggle for equality, human dignity, and respect. As a result of that beautiful struggle, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. After the passage of the act, Black Power was transformed from a slogan into a tangible reality. Now, We have many African American mayors and members of Congress. We even have black governors and one U.S. senator. Today, the most powerful man on earth is a black man, President Barack Hussein Obama Jr. It is undeniable. In many ways, African Americans have made great progress. However, that tremendous progress has been tarnished by recent political scandals involving African American politicians. This past Thursday, the House Ethics Committee convicted longtime legendary Congressman Charlie Rangel of 11 ethics violations and recommended censure. The Washington Post reported that, quote, Rangel, 80, was found to have improperly used his congressional staff and official letterhead to solicit donations from corporate charities and chief executives for a college wing named in his honor, contributions that soared into 6- and 7-figure range once he became chairman of the Tax Writing Committee. The committee also found that he violated New York City rules by housing his political committees in rent-controlled apartments in Harlem, did not pay taxes on a villa he owns in the Dominican Republic, and did not properly disclose hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal financial assets. Let me just stop right there. Charlie Rangel is or was a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. If you know your basic United States civics, you understand that it is the House of Representatives, the Congress, that controls the country's purse strings in general. But there are two committees in particular that really control the nation's purse strings. One of them is the Ways and Means Committee. The other is the Appropriations Committee. Very important for this response to Angryman for reasons that I'll be getting to momentarily. So just keep those two committees in mind. Ways and Means and House Appropriations. While I'm on this point, I want to point out something else that a number of Black Gnostic Speaks' commenters were keen to point out about yours truly. It's become fashionable among black folk, you know, the whole crabs in the barrel thing, to accuse someone like myself of, quote, begging for donations. Now, what they mean to say is that they have a problem with me actually making money off of my podcasting and live show, talk show hosting talent. They really have a problem with that. They have a problem with the free market. You see. Oddly enough, these same people are quiet as a church mouse. To quote Uncle Dave Carroll, you can hear a rat pissing on cotton when it comes to the blatant corruption of people like Charlie Rangel. So they want to take me out to the woodshed for soliciting for Patreon subscribers and PayPal donors to do what I do on a regular basis here on YouTube and on Blog Talk Radio and pretty soon elsewhere. But they don't have any problem with the likes of Charlie Rangel or Coleman Young or Marion Barry or Kwame Kilpatrick, among a great many others that we'll be talking about and documenting in this podcast. Perhaps Angryman has some reasoning for this. Maybe that has something to do with the invisible hand of white supremacy. Involuntary racism, you see, is what makes these critics of yours truly so vociferous, but so church mouse quiet when it comes to the aforementioned Rangel, Young, Barry, Kilpatrick, etc. at all. Let's continue with Mr. Asaka's report on New Possibilities website. He said it was saddening to see this accomplished 80-year-old politician break down and start weeping like a baby. Unfortunately, Rangel is not the only African American accused of ethics violations. Representative Maxine Waters from out of California, Black Gnostic Speaks his home state, also faces ethics charges for improperly seeking to help a bank in which her husband owns stocks. So we're looking at blatant conflict of interest here. Where were all the black YouTubers, Angryman included, on that one? Wait a minute, I got it. The invisible hand of white supremacy has something to do with it. Okay. As the AP, that's Associated Press, reports, her trial has been postponed due to the discovery of an email affecting the charges. The charges include violating a rule requiring lawmakers' conduct to reflect credibly on the House, violating the spirit and letter of a rule prohibiting receipt of benefits by exerting improper influence, and violating a government code of conduct that prohibits dispensing or receiving special favors. Fortunately, at least for now, Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. no longer faces an ethics violation. You will recall that Jesse Jackson Jr. did indeed go to jail for his own ethical peccadillos. Maxine Waters remains in Congress to this day, so that goes back to our previous PDF, how black people will vote in black fuckery day in and day out. Okay? The park apeism continues unabated because black people are cool with it under the guise of fighting the involuntary, invisible hand of white supremacy and structural racism. Gotcha. New Possibilities continues. Last week, Prince George's County's Executive Jack Johnson, not to be confused with the famous boxer, and his wife, Leslie Johnson, were arrested for taking bribes from an unidentified developer. To view the video of the arrest, click this link. The Washington Post reports that the following events led to Johnson's arrest. Let me read that. 2 FBI agents were at the front door of their 2-story brick colonial in Mitchellville. Don't answer it, the county executive said, unaware that more agents were listening in. Johnson ordered his wife to find and destroy a $100,000 check from a real estate developer that was hidden in a box of liquor. Do you want me to put it down the toilet? Leslie Johnson asked. Yes, flush that, the county's executive said. But what about the cash? She asked. $79,600. Put it in your underwear, the county executive told his wife. She replied, I have it in my bra, which is where agents discovered the money after she answered the door. That conversation, as documented in an FBI affidavit, led to the arrest Friday of Jack Johnson and his wife. Each was charged with evidence tampering and destroying evidence in a case the United States Attorney called the tip of the iceberg in a broader corruption investigation in Prince George's County. As we all know, Prince George's County is the richest black county or aggregate area in the entire United States. This month, Leslie Johnson was elected to the Prince George's County Council. After her arrest, voters have launched an online petition drive to prevent her from being from being sworn in. The Jack Johnson situation reminds me of former Baltimore Mayor Sheila Dixon's conviction and former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick's conviction. Earlier this year, as reported in the Baltimore Sun, Dixon entered an Alfred plea to perjury charges related to her failure to disclose on her city ethics form lavish gifts from her then boyfriend Ronald H. Lipscomb, a developer who benefited from city tax breaks in contracts. In December 2009, a city jury found her guilty of stealing roughly $500 worth of retail gift cards intended for the needy. Read Black Folks, Angryman. Please explain to me, where was the involuntary and institutional invisible hand of institutional racism and white supremacy in former disgraced black woman Baltimore Mayor Sheila Dixon's fuckery? I'm all ears. Let's move now to the National Review, founded by the late great I take that back. That wasn't Buckley. Buckley founded the other one. But anyway, let's go to the National Review. This is an article written by Michelle Malkin on July 13th, 2016. So this is just last year, less than a year ago. Congressional black corruption. And what do we see when we pull up this particular article? There he is, the disgraced and now convicted felon, U.S. Congressman Shaka Do Nothing Good for Nothing Fatah. There he is, from my hometown of Philly, 2nd Congressional District. I've talked about him extensively on this channel. You can find many links on both this channel and my all-new channel, Obsidian Radio, the podcast. And ask yourself why no other black male or female YouTubers, not Yvette Carnell, not Antonio Moore, not Dr. Boyce Watkins, not Tariq Nasheed, not Tommy Sotomayor, not Minister Jap or Angryman or Osei Duke Jackson or Black Gnostic Speaks or Ron Wills. Why haven't any of these people or anybody else on black YouTube talking about somebody like Shaka Fatah? Why is that? And if your argument is because he was a local politician, you couldn't be more wrong. Shaka Fatah held his office succeeding Bill Gray here in Philadelphia's 2nd Congressional District for 20 years. Remember when I was talking about Charlie Rangel and the Ways and Means Committee and I mentioned the Appropriations Committee? Shaka Fatah sat on the House Appropriations Committee. That's where the real money is. So let's talk about that. Too many black leaders would rather break the law to line their own pockets than to take care of their constituents. We're naming names. If Black Lives Matter, then why have entrenched members of the Congressional Black Caucus spent more time enriching themselves than taking care of their neglected constituents? Too many social justice protesters are busy throwing shade, rocks, bottles, concrete blocks, and vicious death threats at police officers of all colors who are trying to keep the peace. Instead of moaning about white privilege, I invite radical racial identity warriors, Angryman, to join me in taking on the black political elites selling out their own people. Help expose the most crooked members of the caucus of congressional black corruption. And she starts to list the names. Corinne Brown. This 12-term Democrat from Florida received a 24-count federal indictment last week. Remember, this was done last summer, 2016, while her Congressional Black Caucus colleagues tried to drown out the news with diversionary gun control theatrics. Brown and her chief of staff are charged with creating a fraudulent education charity to collect over $800,000 in donations from major corporations and philanthropies for their own private slush fund between 2012 and early 2016. The director of the hoax group, dubbed One Door for Education Incorporated, pleaded guilty last year to fraud and conspiracy. Prosecutors say that 2 relatives of Brown and her chief of staff steered tens of thousands of dollars in cash deposits to their accounts. The charitable contributions paid for lavish galas, NFL tickets, concert luxury box seats, golf tournaments, and apparently Brown's tax bills. Despite raising nearly $1 million, Brown's charity issued only 2 measly educational scholarships for minority students. So while shamelessly claiming this week to be a martyr akin to the murdered Dallas police officers and victims of the Orlando Jihad, Brown is embroiled in a sordid scandal that exploited black children to line her own pockets. You can't blame righty or whitey this time, crooked Corinne. Shaka Fatah. This 11-term Pennsylvania Democrat was convicted in late June on 23 charges of racketeering, money laundering, and fraud, along with 4 other co-defendants. His son was sentenced earlier this year to a 5-year prison term after being found guilty of 22 counts of separate federal bank and tax charges related to his misuse of business loans and federal education contracts to pay for designer clothes, massive bar tabs, and luxury cars. Like father, like son, right? Fatah the Elder's crimes are tied to schemes to repay an illegal $1 million campaign loan. Like his rotten apple of a son, Fatah siphoned off federal grant money and non-profit funds, including donations to his educational foundation. Sound familiar? To pay off political consultants. The con artists inside your own communities are your own worst enemies. Eddie Bernice Johnson. This 12-term Democrat from Dallas similarly helped steer thousands of dollars in Congressional Black Caucus Foundation college scholarships to 4 family members and 2 of her top AIDS children in violation of the nonprofit's rules. Maxine Waters, we already talked about that. Then there's Alcee Hastings, the 12-term Florida corruptocrat impeached by a federal judge in 1989 for making false statements and producing false documents in a 1983 criminal trial, accusing him of seeking a $150,000 bribe. He went on to win a seat in Congress in 1992 and used his position to enrich his various lady friends. He paid off one girlfriend turned congressional deputy district director more than $500,000 in salary and paid another female staff assistant to accompany him on his endless junkets abroad. Maybe, Angryman, when you and Angel Ramirez Jordan and Minister Jack were talking about simping, you could have been talking about Alcee Hastings. Because after all, as he proves, $500,000 in salary, simping ain't easy. Let's continue. Those few are just the start. There's Texas's Sheila Jackson Lee and the Medicare fraud racket involving a local hospital in the district, Greg Meeks and his $400,000 earmark for a fake healthcare clinic in New York City, and Caribbean resorts jaunts underwritten by convicted financier Alan Stanford, and Wisconsin's Gwen Moore and her lavishly paid friends and family. And of course, the ethics violations, shady business deals, and tax troubles from New York's Charlie Rangel deserve their own encyclopedia. My message for BLM: put down your black power fists and weapons, give a rest to the Blue Lives Murder and fry them up like bacon chants. Aim your outrage at self-serving black leaders and their abject failure to improve black people's lives. Again, I ask my good brother, perhaps he can explain how the invisible hand of involuntary, institutional, and structural racism and white supremacy played a role in so much black political corruption. Let's move now to the website World Net Daily and a very good article written on March 16th, 2014 by Colin Flaherty. Sting: corrupt politicians, all black Democrats. And this again, my hometown, sad to say. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania shut down an investigation of corrupt officials because everyone they caught on tape taking cash and gifts was a black Democrat. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, the sting operation began with a deal. A black lobbyist who has been accused of fraud and participated in the sting to gain favorable treatment from the authorities offered elected officials, black and white, Democrat and Republican, cash and gifts in exchange for votes. Over a 3-year period, the lobbyists found a handful of politicians willing to take the deal. Quote, sources with knowledge of the sting said the investigation made financial pitches to both Republicans and Democrats, but only Democrats accepted the payments, said the Inquirer. Furthermore, all of the offending Democrats were black members of the Philadelphia delegation to the state legislature. 4 state lawmakers took money, the newspaper reported. State Rep. Ronald G. Waters accepted multiple payments totaling $7,650. State Rep. Vanessa Brown took $4,000. State Rep. Michelle Brownlee received $3,500. And State Rep. Louise Bishop took $1,500, said people with knowledge of the investigation. So far, none of these politicians have been charged with wrongdoing. State Attorney General Kathleen Kane told the Inquirer she stopped the investigation because it was poorly conceived, badly managed, and tainted by racism. She even argued that the sting had specifically targeted African Americans. Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams, remember that name now, because he's very important in this too, Angryman. However, himself a black Democrat, refuted the accusation. Quote, the notion that they would target anyone based on race is ridiculous, Williams said in a statement. I am confident they are not racist, and it is regrettable that the Attorney General would casually throw around such an explosive accusation. Oh, the irony. You can read that whole article in full, Angryman. And then you can explain to me how institutional racism, structural racism, the invisible hand of white supremacy made all of those black politicians take money out of the mouths of their own black constituents. I'm all ears. Let's go now to the local news website, and this is one of my go-to sources, BillyPenn.com. Philly District Attorney Seth Williams won't seek re-election, dogged by ethics problems. He had received a record fine from the Philadelphia Ethics Board, and it was reported that he was under FBI investigation. By the way, the Philadelphia Ethics Board fined Seth Williams. We call him King Seth here in the local environs. That should tell you about his chicanery. He was fined over 60 grand. That's just the extent of the fuckery. Ladies and gentlemen, let's read by Anna Orso and Mark Dent. Yesterday, February 10th, Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams announced this morning that he would not seek re-election following more than a year's worth of controversy, questions about his ethics, and a reported FBI investigation. Williams, first elected in 2009 and the city's first black district attorney, made the announcement during a press conference at the DA's office Friday morning. Last month, Williams received a record fine from the Philadelphia Board of Ethics for failing to disclose gifts and sources of income. And it was reported in 2015 that he was under investigation by the FBI. The district attorney apologizes to family and staff members for regrettable mistakes in his personal and financial life and said his actions cast an unnecessary shadow on the office that distracted staff members from the pursuit of justice. He also said the decision to not seek re-election will begin the process of healing for his two daughters who had watched their father face public scrutiny. Williams will serve out the rest of his term, during which time he said he will work to regain the trust of the people of Philadelphia. He didn't take any questions during the press conference after reading aloud a more than 10-minute statement, much of which touted his successes over the last 7 years. We're going to look into those successes in a moment. The move now leaves the race wide open to a large field of candidates who have declared that they'll run for district attorney, including former prosecutor Joe Kahn, former managing director Rich Negrin, municipal court judge Teresa Carl Denny, former prosecutor Michael Untermeyer, and civil rights lawyer Larry Krasner, who are all running as Democrats. Former prosecutors Beth Grossman is running as a Republican. So you can read that entire article right there, Angryman, and anybody else who is interested. This is Philadelphia's first ever black district attorney, his second term, and it went down in flames. Now we turn to a very interesting website called Hey Jackass, illustrating Chicago values. This is a powerful website. If you want to get a really good take on the actual numbers with regard to just the straight carnage that goes on in Chirac every day, the drip, drip, drip of blood that goes on there. You want to get the numbers? All you have to do is just pull up this website called HeyJackass.com. Now I'm just going to read some quick numbers off of this because, there's a lot of talk here recently about our President Donald J. Trump calling in the feds, most likely the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents, to move into the city of Chicago to stanch the bleeding, the daily bloodletting. The city is waist deep in blood going on there. All the park apeism running rampant, and it's all concentrated in black Chicago. We can see it. It's right there on the map. And a lot of people have been talking about this. A lot of black, YouTubers and, racial justice warrior types have been all up in arms about this. But as I'm going to read to you and illustrate further, the numbers are truly indicative of the word carnage. Mr. Trump was correct in using that term. Shows you just how bad the park apeism is there. And then it'll show you prominent black city residents of the Windy City who are in agreement with Mr. Trump's views that the feds need to move in. You know my personal view. We need to send in the Marines. That's my personal view. All right, so let's read just quickly a few of the top headlines here on this website, HeyJackass.com. February to date, shot and killed 10, shot and wounded 66, total shot 76, total homicides 11. Today is the 11th of February, the shortest month in the year. 11 people killed, 76 shot. in 11 days. Okay? The week in progress. From February 5th to February 11th. Shot and killed 7. Shot and wounded 40. Total shot 47. Total homicides 8. Year to date. Now remember, you had 31 days in January. That's 1 month. And 11 days in February. So that'd be 42 days. So not even 60 days. Well, it would be short month, 28. So not even 58 days. Just 42 days. Year to date. Shot and killed 63. Shot and wounded 324. Total shot 387. Total number of homicides 67. 67 dead in 42 days. This is some Rwandan genocide type shit going on here. Like I said, you can see the website for yourself. You do the numbers. You do the math. You tell me what's up with that. And if you don't agree with Trump trying to do something, because Barack Obama did nothing to help his own adopted city, black people try to stop the madness going on there. If you don't agree with Mr. Trump, then you lay out the plan as to what needs to be done. Maybe Angryman and Tariq Nasheed and all these people can explain how the invisible hand of white supremacy is making brother kill brother out on the streets of Chirac. I'm all ears. By the way, Angryman, you might be familiar with the website DJ Vlad, the YouTube channel. Very popular channel. I was approached by DJ Vlad, by the way, to write for his website, and I declined. But what's interesting here is local rapper Lil Bibby says on tape that that's what needs to happen with regard to Trump sending feds to Chicago. Listen to a Chicago black male native speaking in his own voice on these issues, Angryman. Maybe he's ignoring, the same supposed institutional racism that you charge me with ignoring. Explain that. Now we go to more local news. And remember, we just got finished talking about the first black and disgraced district attorney, Seth Williams, touting his successes over the past 7 years. So keep that in mind as we now go to the Philly.com. That's the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News website. And we read a very interesting article that just came out, as a matter of fact. So we're waiting for that article to come up, and it just came up right now. This came out September 16th, 2016. And the name of the article is, Why is Philly's Homicide Rate Going Up? This was written by Chris Palmer, who's a staff writer over at Philly.com. A 24-year-old shot dead on the back steps of his King Sessing is southwest Philadelphia home. It's long been, a hive of Park Apeism, and whatnot out in southwest Philly. It's wild as hell out there. Rapper Meek Mill, who's from North Philly, like yours truly, cousin gunned down outside a South Philly takeout joint. A 68-year-old woman stabbed to death near her front door in northeast Philadelphia, allegedly by her friend, who then killed himself. A decomposed body with dozens of stab wounds found inside a burning East Germantown home. I know Germantown well. That sort of thing is very common in Germantown, particularly East Germantown. Philadelphia is recording homicides at the fastest pace since 2012, and those killings and others last week added to a murder total that by Friday afternoon stood at 203, an increase of about 9% over the same point last year, police statistics show. It's one of the things that keeps you up at night, said Police Commissioner Richard Ross, who noted that the shooting victims have also increased at a similar pace. Other cities across the nation are experiencing rising homicide rates. 37 of the 61 police departments responding to a mid-year survey by the Mayor Cities Chiefs Association, including Atlanta, Dallas, Las Vegas, and Washington, reported rates higher than at the same point last year. Chicago has had a dramatic and well-publicized increase, surpassing 500 homicides earlier this month. Already its highest annual total in a decade. Police leaders and criminologists have found no clear explanation for the uptick in Philadelphia, let alone nationwide. Well, perhaps Larry Elder may have something to add to that particular point in the discussion. Let's check in with what he has to say. In his book, The 10 Things You Can't Say in America, which was published circa 2000, so that's 17 years ago, Larry Elder writes the following. Why don't organizations like the NAACP lead the charge against illegitimacy rather than concentrating on peripheral issues such as whether the Confederate flag should fly over the South Carolina State House or how Webster defines the word nigger in the dictionary? In the case of NAACP President Kwesi Mfume, perhaps the Almanac of American Politics provides a clue. Before becoming president of the NAACP, Mfume served as a congressman from Baltimore. His entry in the almanac reads in part as follows. The 7th District Congressman is Kwesi Mfume, a former councilman and radio talk show host whose name echoes the rebellious Black Power movement of the 1960s, whose personal history is caught up in the social pathology that is at the root of the problems of the black underclass, and who himself has moved on from and above these aspects of that past. Mfume's original name was Frizzell Gray. He was 16 when his mother died, at which point he dropped out of school, held low-paying jobs, and fathered 5 children out of wedlock. He then took control of his life and moved it in another direction. Mfume claims to have a good relationship with all of his children, and we have no reason to believe this isn't so. If Mfume would speak often and bluntly about his early irresponsibility, he could perhaps become an example of how one can seize control and reshape a life of irresponsibility. But his agenda remains stomping out racism rather than calling for personal responsibility. You can read that whole chapter, by the way, Angryman, and it's chapter number 5. It's called, give me a moment, he calls it America's greatest problem, not crime, racism, or bad schools, it's illegitimacy. I'm going to put a Amazon.com link for you to check out the book in full. I'm also going to include both an article that Larry Elder wrote that picks up on many of the points that I just elucidated in that brief excerpt, as well as an interview that he did with Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report right here on YouTube. You can check all of that out. See, I'm not the only person that believes the way that I do, Angryman. You know, and Larry Elder pretty much is in the same camp. The problem is that me and Larry Elder can back up our position with actual evidence. You, on the other hand, have not. Alright, so let's now go to the unsreview.com. This is a website that another one of my favorite websites. It's founded by Ron Unz, and it has a lot of alternative media selections there. This is written by Steve Sailor, and he calls it The Holder Legacy on February 8th, 2017. And there you see a graph, and at the heading of it says Black Lives Shatter. United States murder victims per 100,000 population in 50 big cities. Blacks are the first blue line, dark blue line, light blue line, non-blacks. The national total is the orange line, and then the total number is in really dark blue. And you can see where blacks are just over the years from 1980 to basically the present 2016. You saw the crime starting to dip down in the latter 90s and early 2000s, and then it started to slowly rise back up again, and it took another dip in the first decade of this century, and now it's soared back up. So this is coming from the Economist magazine. So let's go over to the Economist magazine, and this offers 50 cities. Economist, America's murder rate rising at its fastest. So let's look at that. And it says here, and this was written last week, February 4th, 2017. Murder, which grew rare for 20 years, is on the rise again, but by how much? In 2015, the numbers of murders increased by 11% nationwide. During 2016, an escalation of gang violence in Chicago left 646 people dead in a city where 485 had been killed a year before. A dispute ensued over whether the Windy City was simply an isolated example of a barometer of a wider problem. National statistics for 2016 will not be released for 8 months, but to get an early sense of the answer, The Economist has gathered murder statistics for 2016 for the 50 cities with the most murders. These places contain 15% of the country's population and around 36% of murder victims. Our numbers show that in 2016, murders increased in 34 of the cities we tracked. 3 cities experienced a spike in deaths sharper than the 58% suffered by Chicago. Since cities tend to reflect the country as a whole, this suggests that the murder rate is rising at its fastest pace since the early 1970s. So you can read that entire article right there, Angryman, and anyone else who is interested in the facts. And again, I asked the question, if indeed the argument is that the invisible hand of structural racism, institutional racism, and white supremacy is at fault here, then please explain how they made so many black men kill other black men in black cities across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, my position on these issues has been consistent. I've laid this out numerous times since late last year's fall political season. Matter of fact, even before then, because I was a supporter of Donald Trump way back. You can find podcasts of me being in support of him and in support of the Republican Party. You can find that going back at least a year, if not longer. So this is nothing new. I've been very consistent in my argument. My argument is that the fuckery and degeneracy and dysfunction that goes on in black America can be laid at the feet of the welfare mind state. Cut that out and you will significantly reduce the fuckery. There are other things that we can do as well. One of them is that black men should be Republicans. Simple. There are other things that we can do, but those are 2 very simple things. As a matter of fact, being a Republican is a greater chance that you will cut out the welfare mind state, which indeed will cut out on baby mamaism, which in turn will cut down the one-party Democrat rule in black cities, and that will cut down on the violence, which it disproportionately, it's not even a question of debate anymore, impacts black men, you name it. That's what's doing it to black America. We've got all kinds of empirical evidence that supports this argument. What do we have on the side of Angryman? A lot of bellicose statements, personal attacks, killing the messenger, and Ungawa black power. How's that worked for black America, ladies and gentlemen? So that's my argument. Once again, I want to thank Angryman for being a man for once and actually addressing me directly and laying out exactly where it is that we differ. You've heard his argument. Now you've heard mine. And now I turn it over to you. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. And in the meantime, you're listening to Obsidian Radio, which is 100% supported by listeners like you. And if you like what you heard on today's podcast talk show, heard only on YouTube, then what the heck are you waiting for? Put 5 on it and become one of the 300 Patreons I need to stay on the air getting bigger and better. All the details can be found on our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Mumia Obsidian Ali. For those who wish to be private PayPal donors, all you have to do is just shoot me an email first at theobsidianfiles@hotmail or at gmail.com. Put in the subject line donations and I'll walk you through from there. 100% confidentiality is assured. Give whatever you think the show is worth. $5, $5,000, anywhere in between. One time or recurring. I so greatly and deeply appreciate it. Please support alternative media by an everyday brother for everyday brothers. That's 100% corporate and AdSense free. And ask yourself this while you're considering becoming a patron or becoming a PayPal donor. Who else in black YouTube Well, for that matter, Black Social Media Period has just laid out the case that I have. And if you can name who they are, put them in the comment section, put them in the links. And if you think they do a better job, then by all means, go with my blessing. But if you can't come up with a better name, then that's a really good reason why you should be a Patreon subscriber now, isn't it? It's a really good reason why you should be a private PayPal donor, isn't it? Stay tuned. We're going to come back. Peace.